So if you watched lecture 9, you learned about the cadential 6/4. In lecture 10, we learned about the pedal or the neighboring 6/4. Now we're going to be talking about the arpeggiating 6/4. This is a really easy chord progression to create. You just have to watch one little voice leading rule when working on this, which I'll talk about in the lecture. So here, we've got the arpeggiating 6/4. You can see 3 examples of it. First example is on the predominant, the second one's on the tonic, and here we have one on the dominant. So notice that each one of these has a 6/4 chord, a chord that's in second inversion. So in this case, it's on the second beat. In this case, it's also on the second beat, and here we have it on the third beat. Each one of these is arpeggiating to that 6/4, and if you'll notice here, we go from a 1 to a 1/6/4 back to a 1 chord. This is where we get another term that's sometimes used instead of arpeggiating 6/4, and that's called the oscillating 6/4, because it's really just oscillating back and forth between the 1 chord or any root chord and its second inversion variant. Now, you'll notice that there really isn't any strict voice leading to these chords. All we do is we just arpeggiate with the goal of hitting this 6/4 chord. So why do we have the arpeggiating 6/4? It's useful for expanding a tonic area, a predominant area, or a dominant area. Typically, as you'd expect, the predominant is going to expand its own area, the dominant would expand its own area, dominant's over here, and the tonic would expand its own area. But that's not always the case. You can use a dominant to expand the tonic area if you wish. So we're going to go over a few of the basic rules here. But if you look at this, the very first chord, the 4 chord, what we have is an F, an A C, and an F. So that forms our really strong root position chord. And you'll notice in all 3 measures, there's a root position chord on the downbeat. That's typically what we want to do to emphasize the sound of the chord that's going to be arpeggiated. And then it just kind of moves through various voicings of it. So we move with the 5th in the bass for the first example. So we're going to get that really unstable 4 sound. And then it just comes down to a 1/6. This will be a little less common because typically after the 6/4 chord, you come right back to the bass. But for this one, we got something like this. So this creates this sort of expansion that allows the piece to keep moving forward while using only 1 chord. It sounded like 3 different chords in a way, but all the composer is doing is just arpeggiating a single chord. And it can be useful as long as it's not overused. Typically you want to use this for maybe 1 measure, maybe 2 at the most, and then you need to move on to some other chords to create variety. So essentially it's being used to extend a single harmony by changing the bass. What happens in the upper voices doesn't matter so much. You alternate between the root and the 5th, that's the most important thing. So if you notice this in measure 54, there is no first inversion triad, so you don't actually have to arpeggiate all 3 notes of the triad in the bass. Here we do. The 5, the 5/6 going to a 5/6/4. That's probably the most common way you will see an arpeggiating 6/4, with the arpeggiating 6/4 occurring on that final beat, but it's not the only way you're going to see it. That's why I included this example, which is a little more rare. We go from a 4 to a 4/6/4 to a 4/6. And then here we have a 1 to a 1/6/4 right back down to that 1 chord, that root position triad. So this shows you really that there's a lot of different ways you can use the ARP 6/4. The important thing to remember is that the 5th of the chord, wherever you see that 5th in the bass, in this case it's the second beat, third beat, that is where you place the ARP 6/4 label. So you just place it right below the ARP 6/4. You don't want to place it on the end of the measure. You want to indicate where the actual 6/4 chord is occurring when you're doing a Roman numeral analysis. The bass typically will quickly return to the root of the chord, as we see here. The bass goes right back to the root, and here we would expect this 6/4 chord to come right back down to a G most likely. So that's typically how you're going to find it, but again, as we see, after this 6/4, it goes and continues to arpeggiate down to a first inversion triad. So it doesn't always follow that rule, it's just going to be common. And by quickly, it doesn't mean immediately, it means that it will go back to the root in short order, so maybe within 2 or 3 beats. and the most important voice leading rule. You'll notice it's jumping all over the place. It's not moving by stepwise motion. All these other chord progressions we've done, we said you have to move by stepwise motion, the law of the shortest way. But because it's the same chord, it's not so important. So what you can do is you can actually jump all over the place, and that's why the arpeggiating 6/4 is also so useful, because I could take this C and F here, jump it up the octave, and suddenly now I'm in an octave register. I could have a C here and an F here, if we could avoid voice overlapping. So let's talk about the two voice leading issues that are going to come into play. So first, notice this C jumps up to the F. That F is the same note as this F here. So at this point, the alto voice has not overlapped the soprano voice, and it refers to the first beat here. So if I had gone up to the A in the alto, then that would be voice overlapping, because now this A is higher than the F. It doesn't matter if you maybe put a C up here for the soprano. It's still going to be voice overlapping because the A is higher than the F. Now let's say the F stayed where it was and the C jumped up to an A. So we have an F now in the soprano and an A in the alto. That A is now higher than the soprano. So we have two issues all of a sudden. We have voice crossing because the alto has crossed over into the soprano's territory. And we have overlapping voices because the C jumped up to an A, which is higher than the F in the previous chord. So if you don't remember voice overlapping and voice crossing, we talked about that earlier, you need to make sure you watch that lecture where I talk about voice crossing and overlapping voices. Very important concept, because that's the only voice leading error you can really make with these. So here's just an example of these, maybe a little bit bigger so you can see them. Just notice how each one of these chord progressions takes advantage of that 6/4 chord. So next time we're going to talk about the last 6/4 chord that we have available to us, that we're going to talk about in this series, and that's going to be the passing 6/4. Something very useful and commonly used in counterpoint.